Different year, different tournament, different country, different players, same result. England brought one of the most gifted teams to a World Cup, have shown that the team really knows how to play, has specialists in every area of the field, has one of the most vocal fan bases online and in real life, and have subsequently been knocked out prematurely. Sound familiar? Well, that's because I'm not talking about any World Cup in particular. I'm talking about just about all of them. As a matter of fact, no other team has been knocked out of the quarterfinals of a World Cup more times than England, with 7. And what will likely make the 2022 elimination sting even more is not only the fact that they outplayed France, the holders, but also that they somehow lost on penalties, even though the match didn't even go to extra time. Tough.
We're good at that. We're good at talking highly of ourselves as a nation on the basis of very little evidence.
Just so we're all on the same page, this video wasn't made to pile on to the Three Lions. Not at all. You're supposed to back your boys. England on the international stage have certainly improved over the past few tournaments, and the unity around the team is visibly less toxic than it was as recently as the 2000s. But if they want football to come home, there is still a lot of legwork that needs to be done. Today, I wanted to take some time to dive into the timeline of England at the World Cup, the highs and more frequently the lows. In doing so, perhaps we'll be able to understand why there is so much scrutiny around this nation when it comes to the biggest stage and what's caused them to fall short so often. With that being said, will it ever come home? Yo, what's going on everyone? Really hope you're doing well. I'm Tinashe, welcome back to the channel. Don't mind the background, I've just moved houses and it's a work in progress. The England national team is truly a curious case. As you can see, this is a long video. There are very many places that we can start from with this one. But because I'm feeling a tad bit controversial today, I think a good place for us to start is with English arrogance. I'm aware that the coming home phrase may seem annoying to some, even though it's mostly associated with a parody song that was actually making fun of English fans' expectations, but even still, there are several reasons that explain its legitimacy when it comes to England. Football in its most basic form, just kicking a ball, has existed as a sport independently in several cultures across the globe for several years. But it was in 1863, when the English Football Association was formed, that modern football in its current form was officially born. Not only that, but the first ever FIFA recognized international football match was played between England and Scotland in 1872. The more you know. FIFA was formed in 1904, but the first World Cup was only held in 1930. Uruguay both hosted and came out on top in edition number 1. England, however, did not participate. And the reasons for that are aplenty. One of the main reasons for that is that England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland had withdrawn from the organization in 1928 after taking issues with FIFA's definition of amateurs and payments to those players. There were also safety concerns regarding rowdy Latin American fans, which is ironic, but we'll get into why a bit later. It was only 18 years later, in 1946, that the English FA became members of FIFA once more. But make no mistake, there was certainly much more to the Brits' hesitancy to embrace the global side of the game. There was a superiority complex amongst the higher-ups in the FA that propagated for a good chunk of the late 1800s and early 1900s. As the official inventor of modern football and as an absolute juggernaut of the game, England felt that there was no need to fraternize with other countries outside of the UK, really. If you don't believe me, just listen to this quote from FA executive at the time, Charles Sutcliffe, when explaining how he felt about giving equal voting rights to all FIFA members. "I don't care a brass farthing about the improvement of the game in France, Belgium, Austria, or Germany. The FIFA does not appeal to me. An organization where such football associations as those of Uruguay and Paraguay, Brazil and Egypt, Bohemia and Pan-Russia are co-equal with England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland seems to me to be the case of magnifying the midgets." That's right, it's one of those quotes that you think might have some redeeming qualities to it, but it only gets worse and worse. And just in case any of you were wondering, this guy was also the president of the English Football League and had similar opinions when it came to foreign players playing in England. I feel the idea of bringing foreigners to play in league football is repulsive to the clubs, offensive to British players, and a terrible confession of weakness in the management of a club. Sounds like a nice guy. And he wasn't alone in this line of thought. England thought themselves to be a footballing superpower back then, which is fair, because They were. In fact, they were still frequently asked to return to FIFA, even after consistently undermining the organization. You needed England to be participating, or at least to want to be participating, if you wanted your global tournaments to be taken seriously. Nowadays, I'm sure some of you may disagree with that, but it was a fact back then, and it's still a fact to this very day. All the same, the term English arrogance pertaining to football was essentially born out of quotes and mentalities like those of Sutcliffe. Moving along, England's first World Cup ever was in 1950, hosted in Brazil. It was also quite possibly the most embarrassing one in English World Cup history. Favoured to do well in this edition, the mighty English beat Chile in their first match and went on to lose 1-0 to the US of A. This was a shock. When people around the globe picked up the newspaper in the following days, apparently many of them thought that it was a misprint and that the score was actually 10-1 to England. It was not. And because England are the luckiest team on the planet, USA's team was mostly made up of British expats, and the winning goal was scored by Joe Gaetjens, a man that washed dishes for a living. A loss to Spain in their final group match saw England down and out. The 1954 World Cup was, albeit more delayed, also a disappointment, a quarterfinals exit. 1958 was the group stages. However, that one has some incredibly upsetting weight to it. England, of course, had a strong squad, but the Munich air disaster occurred in February of that year. A devastating plane crash that claimed the lives of 23 of the 44 passengers on board, 8 of which were Manchester United players, and amongst the best of the best, 4 of which were established English internationals: Duncan Edwards, Tommy Taylor, Roger Byrne, and David Pegg. This event sent shockwaves around the world. It touched everyone that heard about it, football fan or not, and it certainly had a sizable effect on the English players. The 62 World Cup wasn't as disappointing or downright depressing as the last few, a quarterfinal exit where the team played some good stuff before going out to the eventual winners, Brazil. All the same, the expectations around the national team were far more weighty than many thought they should be. Everyone in England thinks we have a God-given right to win the World Cup. The words of forward Johnny Haynes after being eliminated in 1958. This is a sentiment that many believe to ring just as truly today as it did back then. A sentiment that shows that people really just need to lower their expectations. Face reality. England were never going to win the World Cup, except, of course, for that one time when they did. In 1963, following the resignation of English manager Walter Winterbottom, great name by the way, Alfred Ramsey took his place. And please trust me when I say that the phrase legend doesn't do this man justice at all. A former player and England international himself, and also an extremely sharp footballing mind, nicknamed the General. He lacked any real pace, but was an accurate ball-playing defender that knew how to read the game in front of him in a way that not many could. He played for Spurs over 70 years ago and managed to win the second division in the 49-50 season. He then immediately won the first division with them in the 50-51 season. Later, as a manager and with Ipswich Town, he won the second division in 61 and then the first division in 62. He clearly had some sort of special sauce, which is exactly why the FA decided that he would be the right man for the big job. Up to this point, player selection for the national team was decided upon by a selection committee in the FA. Upon Ramsey's appointment, he demanded that he receive full control over player selections. His demands were met, and amongst his first actions as manager, he made Bobby Moore captain at only 22, and he declared that, quote,
England will win the World Cup in 1966.
A bold prediction. I mean, yes, the World Cup was being held in England 3 years after Ramsey's appointment, and he was clearly a footballing savant. But let's be real, winners of the Cup? I don't think many people were convinced. Remember the embarrassing 1-0 loss to the US in the 1950 World Cup that I spoke about earlier? Ramsey was on the pitch that day. This is the same guy that was supposed to lead England to victory? Nonetheless, the man was clearly a generational leader. Having served in the army during the war, having captained damn near every team he played for as a pro, having won trophies in unlikely fashion before even taking up the England job. There was no better man to give it a go, and there hasn't been anyone better ever since. The group stages of the 66 World Cup started off well for England. Here's what the lineup was looking like initially. With the team playing in a 4-3-3 throughout the group stages, 2 wins and a draw against France, Mexico and Uruguay was enough to see them through to the quarterfinals. Disaster struck in the final group match as Jimmy Greaves, the greatest goal scorer in English top-flight history with 357 goals and 516 appearances, was cut down and sidelined. In a bit of a pickle, Ramsey decided to make a few drastic changes. Instead of looking for a more experienced replacement, he brought in Geoff Hurst, which was bold as there were seemingly more obvious choices. And also because Hurst firstly only had a handful of England appearances, and secondly because he didn't impress in the warm-up matches leading up to the tournament itself. Ultimately, that proved to matter very little though. Another change that Ramsey made was scrapping the use of wingers. In an attempt to simply outrun and overwhelm the opposition, hard-running midfielders were put into the team and a 4-4-2 was adopted. This prompted the press to dub Ramsey's 1966 England as the wingless wonders. In the midfield, we had Alan Ball, Nobby Stiles, Martin Peters and Bobby Charlton, all traditional midfielders. At the back, Bobby Charlton's older brother, Jack Charlton, Bobby Moore, Ray Wilson and George Cohen. Behind them, Gordon Banks. And at the very front, Jimmy Greaves and Roger Hunt in the groups, but eventually Geoff Hurst and Roger Hunt throughout the knockouts. Argentina were up first in the quarterfinals, a violent match which saw words and boots fly in all directions. The most controversial of words were those of Ramsey himself. Hurst scored the winner, sending England through by a 1-0. But at the final whistle, in the middle of a shirt swap between England's George Cohen and Argentina's Alberto Gonzalez, Ramsey grabbed Cohen's shirt, refusing to let him swap it. In fact, he was so angry with Argentina's roughhousing that he referred to them as animals directly after the match. This was obviously not well received in Argentina, and the whole of South America for that matter. Among other actions, many have referred to this string of events as a main contributor to the souring of opinions of the English in Latin America. In terms of football, at least. England followed up this victory with a 2-1 win against Portugal. A Bobby Charlton brace proved more decisive than a Eusebio penalty. Eusebio, who was the top scorer of that edition with 9 goals and also the reigning Ballon d'Or holder. England then faced off against a familiar foe in the finals, West Germany. This was not going to be easy. And somehow, it looked like Ramsey was making it harder on himself. Jimmy Greaves was fit and available for the final, to the relief of much of the host nation. But Ramsey decided to stick with Hurst. Never change a winning team. Hurst scored a hat-trick. A hat-trick in the World Cup final. The only time that's ever happened, by the way. Against West Germany. No surprise that he is now referred to as Sir Geoffrey Charles Hurst. Now, I feel like I do have to mention that Hurst's second goal, given the context and the fact that it was in a final, is probably the most controversial goal in World Cup history. The game required extra time after finishing 2-2 in regular time. Alan Ball crossed it into Hurst's path, his shot hit the crossbar, bounced down, and the goal was given. Germany were infuriated. Today, it's widely believed that the ball indeed did not cross the line. Several studies, reenactments, and so on have proved just that. But that was 56 years ago. At this point, it's spilled milk. And Germany would ultimately get their revenge, a few times, actually. Sir Alfred Ramsey and Sir Bobby Charlton also made their way into knighthood. Bobby Charlton, who won the Golden Ball for the 66 World Cup, as well as the 1966 Ballon d'Or. Very creative names we have for these awards, I must say. 4-2 to England. It was home. Football was home. You did it, Alf. We'd have been nothing without you. Midfielder Nobby Stiles said this in 1966. Makes sense coming from him. After all, the English FA pressured Ramsey into dropping him after some violent misconduct against France. Ramsey refused, and Stiles was pivotal in England's win. Ramsey is an icon, statistically the greatest manager to ever manage England. The only stat I'm taking into consideration is this one, by the way. Nevertheless, all good things must come to an end. England traveled to Mexico ready to defend their title 4 years later, though they weren't as dominant this time around, and the events that followed indicated that fate was not on their side. Okay, so what's coming next is a very spicy story that I can't believe I didn't know about until working on this video. In the lead up to the 1970 edition, England traveled to Colombia to train and acclimatize to local conditions. Captain Fantastic, Bobby Moore, was heavily accused of allegedly shot shoplifting a valuable bracelet from the gift shop at the hotel they were staying at. The accusations against him were made by an assistant shopkeeper as well as another local bystander. But here's the thing, no evidence of any kind was ever found. Moore even offered to have himself searched immediately after leaving the shop and nothing was found on him. But the accusers were convinced of his wrongdoings. After a few days, he was formally arrested and detained for 4 days as the squad had to travel to Mexico to set up camp. Then he was simply released on the basis of insufficient evidence and went on to put out some of his greatest performances ever with England. They were unfortunately knocked out by, you guessed it, West Germany in the quarterfinals, a 3-2 loss that required extra time. Also, Gordon Banks had food poisoning the day before this match, with backup keeper Peter Bonetti stepping in and making a few costly errors. Also, centre forward Jeff Astle had a fear of flying. To settle himself down on England's flight to Mexico, he had one too many and ended up needing help getting off the plane. Along with Bobby Moore's situation, this prompted a local Mexican newspaper to print a headline labeling England as a team of drunks and thieves. And if you thought we were finished recapping England's controversial relationship with Spanish-speaking countries, we're nowhere near done. But just circling back to the Moore incident, there have been several theories explaining what actually went down, all of which are merely theories because nothing was ever proven. Some say it was a prank gone horribly wrong by one of the younger English players. Some believe it was an elaborate scheme to shake up the English squad by targeting arguably their most imposing figure. And then a theory that a lot of people believe to be the closest to the truth. This was a common extortion trick pulled by either the hotel or some conman. Accuse a rich, powerful, or public figure, better if they're foreign, and demand a large chunk of change to make it all go away. An interesting theory, also one that is backed up by former Botafogo coach João Saldanha. According to him, back when he coached the Brazilian side some years ago and they stayed in the very same hotel in Colombia, an attempt was made to plant jewelry on his traveling party and demand hush money. And the fact that the accusations from the witnesses of this alleged crime were riddled with inconsistencies only served to further back up this theory. Also, apparently the jewelry store in question closed soon after this whole thing went down, and the shop assistant fled the country. Something was fishy, but
I guess we'll never know.
Okay, the tinfoil hat is coming off. For now. Anyway, that was my roundabout way of saying that England did not retain the title. That was a long way of saying it, but there it is. Even further, disappointing performances from England in the 72 Euros, as well as failure to even qualify for the 1974 World Cup, spelled the end of Ramsey's reign. Justified or not, it's widely viewed that his sacking was handled poorly. A clash in personalities between him and the FA higher-ups led to constant internal friction. Failure to qualify for the World Cup offered a fantastic excuse for dismissal. And just like that, he was gone. What has followed over the 48 years since 1974 for England can probably best be described as despair, disjointed and destitute, with the odd feeling of delight, but mostly despair. In 1978, again they failed to qualify for the World Cup, and if you've made it this far in the video, you already know that there was a spicy scandal in the middle of all of this. Don Revie, England's full-time manager after Ramsey, was already on shaky terms with the FA before even being appointed. The man is probably Leeds United's greatest manager ever and basically made them a winning team out of nothing, but with England, bad performances and even worse rapport were the main issues here. Everyone knew his days were numbered. In 1977, he sent the squad to South America for a friendly with Brazil. He didn't join them as he claimed he would be scouting Italy, an upcoming opponent in the 78 World Cup qualifiers. He was actually hashing out the final details of his next job, manager of the United Arab Emirates. He never worked in English football again. The 80s was a very contentious and controversial decade for English and UK football. By this point, football hooliganism was widespread amongst the biggest clubs in the country. Several instances of fans being banned or even convicted and teams being kicked out of competitions as a result of said fan activity were rife in this decade. This translated to local games and away games, foreign away games. I think you probably all know where I'm going with this. Of course, this was only as a result of a vocal minority, but as we all know, it's usually the vocal minority that defines public opinion for just about everything. The reputations of traveling British fans in foreign countries and international tournaments were just as bad. There was the 1982 World Cup qualifiers where riots broke out in a match with Switzerland in Basel. England went 2-0 down, and travelling fans were pictured stabbing locals as fights broke out across the stadium. Swiss pubs and stores were looted and had their windows smashed in before and after the match. The ill-fated game was given the name the Battle of Basel. For good reason, it seems. The 1982 World Cup, from a footballing perspective, wasn't terrible on the pitch. A second-round exit, but fights involving not only English fans, but the entirety of the FA were afoot. Argentina and the United Kingdom were waging war over sovereignty of the Falkland Islands in 1982, a bloody war that had casualties in the hundreds on either side. Gibraltar, another British territory, was also undergoing its own perpetual dispute over governance between the UK and Spain. And then, on the purely footballing side of things, Sir Alfred Ramsey's reference to Argentina as animals all the way back in '66 was still widely in circulation. As I said, the entirety of Latin America, as well as every Spanish speaker, took this as an insult. And at the onset of the 1986 World Cup in Mexico, the British players themselves felt something needed to be done. A year prior to that, the Hazel disaster caused English clubs to be banned from all European competitions indefinitely, something which the tournament organizers were painfully aware of. An open letter was written to the British public by England, Scotland, and Northern Ireland's captains and was published in a popular local Mexican newspaper. It was also handed to all UK traveling fans at the airports as part of a leaflet. Now, I'm going to read you a short extract from it, and it's a bit long, but just bear with me for a second. Thank you for joining us in our great World Cup journey to Mexico. We hope we can give you the results and performances your loyalty deserves. We know that the vast majority of you have no intention of doing anything in Mexico except enjoying the football, the sun, and the hospitality of our Mexican hosts. To those few who might be tempted to spoil it for the rest of us, we say, please give us a break. Remember, you are ambassadors for Britain just as much as we are. Don't do anything that's going to make our job harder. Together, we can make the whole of Britain proud of us. The fact that an open letter like this was even necessary speaks volumes. The tournament itself wasn't a terrible display by the English, but it still wasn't enough, sadly. They succumbed to a 2-1 loss to Argentina, as fate would have it. In this match, one of the most controversial and one of the greatest goals was scored. 2 goals, by the way, both by the golden boy, Diego Maradona, a winding solo effort and a goal courtesy of the hand of God himself. In Diego Maradona's memoir, Yo Soy El Diego, published 14 years later in 2000, he stated that this was revenge. Somehow, we blame the English players for everything that had happened, for everything that the Argentinian people had suffered. I know that it sounds crazy, but that's the way we felt. The feeling was stronger than us. We were defending our flag, the dead kids, the survivors. He was, of course, referring to Islas Malvinas, the Argentine name for the Falkland Islands. Now, it may seem like I've been painting a grim picture of England's footballing reputation on and off the pitch in the late 1900s, because I am. It was pretty bad, but that was about to change. The early 90s did a lot to inject some positivity into not only views regarding English and British fans by foreigners, but also views regarding the English national team by English people. By 1990, England had formed a strong squad. They were managed by Bobby Robson, who was going into his last tournament before returning to club management. And they also had Paul Gascoigne, who was crazy, but also crazy good. This was England's greatest World Cup performance since they won it 24 years prior. And they won the Fair Play Award, having received the lowest number of yellows per match and no red cards. They made it to the semi-finals and showed a lot of heart in getting themselves there. But alas, they were eliminated on penalties by the eventual winners, surprise surprise, West Germany. Paul Gascoigne cried after being booked in the semis, as it meant that if England were to progress, he would miss the final. The image of him shedding those tears, realizing just how much this meant to him, it triggered something in the support that had been lacking for quite some time. Hope. It was better than Baywatch, and for the generation of men and women who were roughly the same age as you, it was some kind of miracle. You looked like one of us, but played like one of them. Pele, Cruyff, Maradona, and the greatest of the greats. If you could do that, then surely anything was possible. This is what Cole Morton of The Independent had to say about Gazza's performance and passion, which all sounds well and good, but at the same time, this hope was not built upon in the slightest. Like they had done 20 years prior, England failed to qualify for the 1994 World Cup. And then, in '98, they suffered a round of 16 exits to Argentina. And again, some intriguing talking points from this result. Glenn Hoddle, who was once a very talented player himself, was the England manager come this edition. He had a bit of flash, a bit of sleek trickery and creativity. However, there is a case to be made that he was not appreciated nearly enough by England considering what he offered. So I'm going to quickly call back to Sir Alfred Ramsey's wingless wonders. I mean, you guys remember them, right? The 66 team that favored hard running instead of intricate play? Well, that mentality propagated for decades upon decades, and many English managers have attempted to emulate it. Many people believe that this has played a large role in England's poor showings since. A failure to adapt and try something new. I mean, it's not like the ways of the old were working all that well. You know, Hoddle left the likes of Matt Letizia at home for the '98 World Cup and only gave Steve McManaman, another creative player, a total of 17 minutes of playing time. Gascoigne was also left at home, but this was mostly because he was caught eating kebabs and drinking late at night only a week before the final squad selection was made. David Beckham was scapegoated, certainly not for the last time in an England shirt, as he got himself a red card after some Hollywood levels of play acting from Diego Simeone. And you know what? If it works, it works. The turn of the century brought with it arguably England's greatest collective unit ever. On the domestic scene, Premier League clubs were dominating European competitions. In the 10 years between 2000 and 2010, English sides featured in the European Cup final 6 times, with an all-English final too. Ironically, that all-English final was in 2008, the same year that England failed to qualify for the Euros. Regardless, England's fortunes throughout this entire period pretty much remained consistent. They bring a fantastic team to the tournament, only to fall apart due to some sort of drama or freak event. 2002, England strike first in the quarterfinals against Brazil, only for Brazil to overturn the deficit and Ronaldinho to score a free kick he had no right scoring. David Seaman was basically in Brazil's half. That's how far off his line he was. Also, Dinho got himself a red card in the 57th minute, but England failed to capitalize. 2006, another quarterfinals defeat. Wayne Rooney didn't like the idea of Ricardo Carvalho having kids, so he gave him a bit of a ball tap, which I think was unintentional, but that's up to interpretation. The Portuguese players crowd the ref, with Rooney's Manchester United teammate Cristiano Ronaldo leading the disgruntled crowd. Rooney's not a fan of what's going on and gets physical with Ronaldo. He is then sent off, and England lose on penalties. 2010, round of 16 this time. Germany, again. The Germans surge ahead to a 2-0 lead, but the momentum shifts heavily and England scored 2 goals in under a minute. Only issue was that second goal was disallowed. Why? Negligence. Lampard struck a fierce shot off the crossbar. The ball clearly bounces off it and crosses the line, but the goal was not given.
Hey, I've seen this one. This is a classic.
Life really does come full circle sometimes, you know? And I remember watching this match. I was in South Africa at the time. England were very much on top at that point. If that goal were given, who knows what could have happened. Anyway, they were visibly deflated after this ruling and went on to lose 4-1. 2014, their worst ever finish. Group stages. Knocked out after losing their first 2 matches. All of these exits and their accompanying performances were unique, and also uniquely embarrassing. There were of course common themes over the years when it came to why these losses occurred. Where is the unity in the squad? This was of course in reference to the fact that even at the time, several players admitted to favoring club football and the bonds that they had with their domestic teammates over the national team. Why does the midfield lack any sort of creativity? Why is it that a functioning midfield can't be produced with Frank Lampard, Paul Scholes, Steven Gerrard, Michael Carrick, Joe Cole, and Owen Hargreaves at your disposal? Why is Wayne Rooney not scoring? Why does every England keeper always make a high-pressured, silly mistake? Will it ever come home? Again, the hope had gone out the window. But maybe, just maybe, soon, things would be different. A group stage exit in 2014 must have felt like the closest thing to relegation that the English FA higher-ups could think of. An embarrassing exit from the 2016 Euros against Iceland in the round of 16 didn't help much either. So, who do you call when your club is in a pickle and the threat of relegation looms?
Big Sam?
Good old Sam Allardyce. And my man did his thing. He ended his national team tenure with a 100% win record. I mean, he only managed 1 match and got dismissed after 2 months on the job, but But why would you even mention that? It's irrelevant. Shortly after taking over, he was secretly recorded while speaking to a group of Asian investors. Except they weren't investors, they were actually undercover Telegraph journalists. He said a lot of things in these meetings, nothing particularly illegal, but as the England manager, you really can't be caught saying stuff like this. Among other things, he said that the FA's billion-pound revamp of Wembley was a waste of money. He mocked Roy Hodgson, his predecessor, for his lack of personality and how he spoke. He claimed that there were several ways to circumvent the FA's rules on third-party ownership of image rights. You can still get around it. I mean, obviously the big money's here. Wild. Just wild.
He has to go, blood. He has to go, blood.
Gareth Southgate was up next following this debacle and was looking to rewrite his own misfortunes with the national team. A man that was in England's 1996 Euro squad, the same player that missed the crucial pen that left England eliminated that time around. And he did a lot to get his team on the front foot. In 2018, England put out their joint best performance at a World Cup since winning in '66 by matching their exploits from 1990, a semi-final appearance. And I guess there were a few reasons for why England did so well here. Recognizing that the midfield was certainly England's weakest area, Southgate focused on defense and having options in deep areas. 5 players at the back meant that they were not short of cover when under threat. In front of the defense was a holding midfielder and 4 attackers adept at the counter. The attackers were also all in central areas and pressed relentlessly when out of possession. This helped with the midfield battles that they so poorly lost in recent times. There was also the increase in set-piece proficiency. 9 out of the 12 goals scored in Russia came from a dead ball situation. And then, perhaps the most important changes were visible increases in 2 things. 1. The levels of accountability present amongst each player. And 2, how unified the team was. Manchester United, Manchester City, Liverpool, Chelsea, Arsenal. From the outside looking in, it looked like these players actually wanted to be around each other. Surprise, surprise. In a team sport, that's important. Even though it didn't come home, spirits were high once more. Waistcoats were flying off the shelves like hotcakes. It was a good moment. England went one step further in the following competition, their first ever finals appearance in the Euros. This was met with a loss to the Italians on pens, but again, there was a lot to be hopeful for. And with the emergence of a crop of extremely gifted players, there was reason to buy into the hype. Jude Bellingham, Bukayo Saka, Declan Rice, Phil Foden, and more. Things were looking promising. All of a sudden, the midfield was arguably the greatest asset. Players like Marcus Rashford, Jack Grealish, and Trent Alexander-Arnold were bench options. It was looking good. 6-1 against Iran in their 2022 World Cup opener raised expectations even more. Some very calm and composed showings from the guys here, especially from Jude Bellingham, who is somehow 19. The remainder of their group stage matches weren't as dazzling. Failure to take control left them vulnerable on a few occasions, but the job was completed in the end. No harm done. Senegal in the round of 16 was another case where the team was looking fragile in the beginning and grew into the match. A 3-0 scoreline was deserved, but Senegal will likely feel hard done by after their early showing. France in the quarterfinals was where things got a bit sticky. Now, I must admit, I didn't expect England to play with as much authority as they did in this match against France. You know, the reigning champions no less. But they did. All the same, knockout football is about moments, and France took theirs. Even after being awarded a penalty in the dying minutes of regular time, they could only watch as the French celebrated a 2-1 victory. England out in the quarterfinals again. It's become customary for England to fall short in major tournaments at this point. After all, they have only won one major tournament in their entire history. But to be entirely fair, only 8 teams have ever won a World Cup, so the vast majority of teams haven't even come close to doing even that. But to be fair, the vast majority of teams also can't claim to be the inventors of modern football, nor do they boast the richest, most watched and most followed football league on the planet. Listen, you can't sugarcoat it. Anything but number 1 for a footballing nation of this stature has to be viewed as a disappointment. Much has been said about Gareth Southgate's tactics, or rather lack thereof. Some of it is justified in my eyes. His substitutions and game management are rarely inspiring, but I think some people have gone a little bit overboard when it comes to the criticism. Yeah, I mean, maybe Rashford should have come on instead of Sterling, and maybe the change of shape should have come sooner. But let's not forget that a penalty was missed. And this isn't to diss Kane or anything. It's just a small illustration illustration of how the scapegoat mentality propagates and how it has already propagated. In any case, apart from all of that, there is still a lot to be hopeful for if you're an England supporter. A new golden generation is here, and very many of the players I mentioned above will only be in their mid-20s come the next World Cup. They will only get better and likely only become more fluid, I think. Before we wrap this one up, I want to circle back to the question posed at the beginning of the video. Will it ever come home again? Honestly, I think it will, right? It kind of has to at some point, right? Maybe I'm optimistic. Maybe I'm deluded. Who knows? They have the talent and the infrastructure. Let's see if these can someday convert into results. And there we have it, a rundown of the entire history of the English national team. Let me know what you guys thought. Feel free to follow all the socials. That's all from me today. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you're having a great day. Cheers, and I will catch you in the next one.